I'm Karima Brown. It's Sunday and it's time for The Fix. First up, President Cyril Ramaphosa's second investment conference has come and gone, with pledges from private and public sector investment totaling billions. But today we ask, will it create the much-needed jobs required to make a serious dent into chronic unemployment? Then we focus on the Democratic Alliance's leadership race, which is in full swing. We look at how the official opposition will grow in black communities under the leadership of Helen Zille, given her rejection of the diversity clause. Mahashule Ghana, who has declared his candidacy for the leadership position, says it is possible. I ask him how it will be done. And as is custom, we take a look at what's made the headlines in the weekend newspapers and why. The Fix starts now. Welcome to this edition of The Fix, where every Sunday we hold the decision makers to account. We tell you why it matters, how it affects you, and why you should care. Now, some 363 billion rand was pledged at the investment summit attended by local and foreign business at the recently held investment conference. But does it go far enough toward of junk status? And more importantly, how will the money be used to create much needed jobs? Business Leadership South Africa, Busi Mavuso joins me in the panel, as well as Sunday Times contributing editor Hilary Joffe and the Director General in the Department of Employment and Labour, Mr. Thobile Lamati. We are going to be discussing the issue, but let's first listen to the President speak on this all-important conference that was held this week past.
It is now exactly 1 year since the inaugural South African Investment Conference, where local and international investors responded wonderfully to our call and stood on this platform to make investment announcements totaling nearly 300 billion rand. Of the 31 projects that were announced on this platform last year, 8 projects have been realized and completed, meaning that the money has been spent, factories have either been built or facilities improved, and workers employed, and all has gotten away very well. 17 are in construction or at implementation stage. In total, this represents 238 billion rand of investments that were announced last year. This is a phenomenal achievement by those who stood here to announce those investments.
That, of course, President Cyril Ramaphosa being very enthusiastic, explaining what was achieved at the very first one. Hilary Joffe from the Sunday Times, let me start with you. You've got an editorial on the conference, and you were saying, worthy as it was, what did the conference really add? In your view, does it take us to much needed investment that will actually create jobs?
Yes and no, Karima. Look at it in context. Every year in this economy, almost 900 billion rand is spent on investment. Most of it, 70%, by the private sector. So just to stay in business and expand a little bit, the private sector is investing sort of 600-700 billion every year. Adding 300 billion to that 363 is really impressive. Call it 75 billion a year over 5 years. And if we keep adding to it, it will boost the economy. But keep in mind that quite a lot of what was announced, companies were already doing anyway. Some of it is just stay in business capex. So we shouldn't get overexcited that this is the big spark to ignite growth. Having said that, I think what the President's doing is quite important to showcase the investment that companies are doing anyway. I mean, just staying in business and committing to the economy is in itself holding up jobs. And maybe when you put it all together cumulatively, it does help to support the kind of confidence that we really need to grow the economy. But this is certainly not the magic bullet at all. And there are a lot of things that are not being addressed yet to get growth and investment going.
A fantastic way to segue into a question for you, Busi, from, of course, business leadership, South Africa. A lot still needs to be done. Give me ideas of which sectors that was pledged to will create the most jobs, given the fact that we are also working toward automation, given that there's innovation, and that will lead to the destruction of jobs.
Yeah, so thanks for that, Karima. And I think we've been saying, I think since for the past 18 months, what are the cases that if you realize that our economy is characterized by low skills or no skills, there's going to have to be a deliberate and intentional focus in terms of investing in those sectors that are actually labor intensive. And yes, I understand that the globe, and the world is going towards fourth industrial revolution, but there's going to have to be a realization that South Africa is actually, in this situation where we find ourselves in, so we can't completely discard our realities and actually be ignorant of what confronts us as an economy, and want to catch up with the rest of the world. So unfortunately, we're sitting in a situation where we're actually going to have to do both, but it can't be one, over the other. So the agricultural sector, there was a significant investment that was actually mentioned, and I think there was something around a factory, I think, that is being built, or whatever. But I guess a lot of the investments that are coming in, do take that into cognizance, that you're actually going to need, laborers who are actually going to get in, into jobs, because that is what the focus is.
Absolutely. Now, DG Lamati, you are specifically responsible for employment creation. Does the pledges that were made at this investment conference, let's say, for example, into agriculture, give you confidence that jobs will be created, given the fact that agribusiness are increasingly being mechanized?
Yes, they do. I think Busi touched on a very important point, that it does, even though the world in South Africa is moving into a direction of automation, labor-intensive work is still very, very important, and that's why government has taken a conscious decision to support the agri sector, and therefore pledges towards investing in that sector, they will go a long way in sustaining jobs. For us, that's very, very important. But we need to, in the long run, ready our people for the fourth industrial revolution. We can't just push it aside. It's already here. We need to make sure that the skills that are required are there. And I'm very happy that the Department of Basic Education has taken a step to introduce at school level the technical subjects. And that's very good. That bodes well for our country and the skills that we require. So it provides young people the opportunity to move into streams that that are needed by the economy. So for us, I think the pledges are very good.
Now, Hilary, Mr. Lamati is obviously speaking a bit more long term. We're sitting currently with over 10 million people unemployed. In fact, our unemployment figures went up recently. We have a very bleak economic outlook. Given that businesses were going to be doing this anyway, how do you bring business to the party, whose essential responsibility is to create growth, but we know growth is not necessarily associated with jobs. We've had high percentages of growth in the past, but we haven't had, the growth in job creation as we should. How do you get a business to understand that reality of South Africa? How do you get them to commit to labor-intensive industries when it will be cheaper for them, more profitable for them to actually go the automation route?
Look, Karima, I know that growth in the past may not have created enough jobs, but you're not going to get jobs without growth, and you're not going to get growth without investment. And last year, in fact, despite whatever the president achieved at his investment summit last year, investment actually fell, mostly because of the public sector, not the private sector. The private sector is still investing. So jobs are being created, but you need to boost that a lot more. And businesses are not going to invest to create jobs. They're going to invest to make money. So you've got to create the kind of environment in which they're going to make money. Now, in part, you want to get into a virtuous cycle where the economy is growing and they're investing into a growing economy, but also you want to kind of unblock the kind of constraints that are basically preventing them making money and investing. So I think there's a lot still to be done on Eskom, on the regulatory landscape, all of that.
Now, Busi, this is the big issue. Hilary was actually mentioning something that economist Duma Kubule spoke about when we previewed this investment conference. He was saying that if you look at private investment, they've actually come to the party. It's the state that hasn't. And we, of course, know the reason why that is so is because of the huge debt that state-owned companies are sitting with and the risk that it actually exposes the entire fiscus to. Now, is the answer cutting jobs there, considering that those are vehicles that are meant to actually deal with our developmental needs, such as labor-intensive, options? And how does that clash with things like our commitments on climate change and so on? If you look, for example, at Gwede Mantashe's insistence that coal, for example, still be an option when the world is just going in a different direction.
So the answer is not necessarily cutting jobs. The answer is actually to make sure that these SOEs are run like businesses, as Tito said. So I think first and foremost, that's going to have to be the primary focus. And if it means that you're sitting with costs that are above your revenue line, of course you're going to have to cut jobs. But obviously, in our situation, I think there is that high cognizance that before you touch the jobs, is there any other line item in your OPEX that you can actually reduce to ensure that you still keep the jobs? But then I think that in Eskom's case, for instance, if it means that Eskom is going to have to cut the 15,000 jobs, then Eskom is going to have to cut the 15,000 jobs. But you see, none of these things are actually silver bullets, Karima. You can't actually do the one thing and think that it's actually going to get us out of this rut. The other thing is probably to look at the structure of our industries. You're sitting with oligopolies, in the main, in almost all the industries, where you've got 4 or 5 big players, and there isn't, an opportunity for small players to come in.
You see, you're making a very important point. You're talking about oligopolies, but they are not just in the private sector, they're also in the state sector.
And I think Eskom is the case in point. Allow players to come in.
But DG, this is what the unions have opposed. They see that as equal to privatization. How are you going to get them on the same page that there is going to be a just transition and that you need to, even when a company is state-owned, bring in competition, and that competition doesn't automatically equate privatization?
It's going to be a very difficult task, but
what is your department doing to help the unions understand that this is a necessary step to take?
Last week we had a NEDLEC hosted a dialogue with Germany, and one of the issues that were raised there was the importance of taking the interest of the country in everything that you do. Now, this is the message that we're trying to relate to our colleagues who are unions and also business as well, that in their engagement, the interest of the country should be uppermost in whatever they do. So that's the message that we're driving, and that's why NEDLEC hosted that kind of a
What was the reception, DG, to that message from the unions, considering that they always argue? I mean, if you look at the responses, certainly from COSATU and SAFTU that actually marched during one of the days of the investment conference, they argue that they take the brunt every time really tough decisions have to be made and trade-offs have to be made, and that business doesn't come to the party when trade-offs have to be made. Are they convinced that they need to act in the national interest and not in the sectoral interests?
No, they are, but they also want business, like you're saying, to come to the party. They are saying, for instance, if you say to them they must consider not embarking on industrial action, even though they are aggrieved, business must also consider salaries that they give to executives. You can't say you don't have money to pay workers, and at the same time you have you give executive exorbitant increases. So there has to be a balance. Both sides they have to make sure that they compromise. There is willingness on the part of labor, but all what they want is that everybody must put their cards on the table, and we then take decisions on for the benefit of the country. So there is appetite for that, but of course It's not something that is going to be easy because they represent constituency. Sometimes what leaders say is not something that enjoys the support of leadership.
Absolutely.
Masses,
Hilary, let me bring you in here. Very often Labour leadership understands, but it's very hard to go back and sell that to constituencies that are feeling the pinch, particularly as food prices go up and, the petrol price has come down, but you don't see the change in the price of tomato or a sack of, potatoes or pap or whatever it is that people buy. And it's very difficult, given the fact also that wages often supplement the unemployed family members of those who are employed. What do you think is the message that should be given by the state and by the private sector to Labour to bring them on board and to make them understand that we need to take the pain now for the long-term, future of economic growth, of more jobs, of more inclusion?
I suppose it's a two-part message. The first is, yes, we do need to take some pain now. Our public finances are spiralling completely out of control. You mentioned Moody's. The investment conference can't directly deal with it, but can certainly try and boost growth.
Yes.
But in the short term, that's a hard ask. But we do need to rein in public spending somehow and get our public finances back under control as a basis for higher growth. But the second part of the message, which is crucial, and maybe this is where the investment conference is quite important, is that both government and business need to be demonstrating that we can create new jobs. So if you're supporting 10 unemployed people on each wage, we want to be able to demonstrate that some of those 10 unemployed people will get jobs. So the household wage job will go up, even if somebody doesn't get the wage increases they want, or even if somebody loses a job. And we've got to look overall at the prospects for job creation across the whole economy and across households. And that's a really important message that the investment conference can send, is there are, or there will be, more jobs being created to supplement or substitute for those that are being lost.
Busi, the issue around the difference in pay in South Africa is often highlighted. Trade unions like pointing to the extreme exorbitant salaries that chief executives get, not just in the public sector but also in the private sector. Has Business Leadership South Africa discussed the idea of capping salaries of executives? And what leadership are you providing to get that worker who needs to support unemployed people to say, okay, fine, I will ask for an increase that is, inflation related or even below inflation, but I know the boss of this company is having to tighten his or her belt as well. Has business really come to the party on that?
You already see that happening, Karima, where you find that annual cost of living adjustments, that are given to employees are actually done on a scale of, there's a threshold. Those earning below a certain amount is probably going to be CPI +2. Those who are earning above a certain threshold is just CPI or CPI minus. And I think it is being exercised. But I think if you leave it that way, I think for each and every individual business to actually make their own decision, you're leaving it to chance. So there is a bigger discussion actually that we're having at BUSA to say, how do we actually start addressing this? Because the bigger problem that this actually where it manifests in is that of inequality.
Yes.
You're sitting with two economies, one nation, precisely
Absolutely.
Because of this. And you're seeing the social instability precisely because people are saying enough and no more.
So what appetite is there at BUSA for company execs to cap their income, their bonuses? I mean, we've seen, for example, just over the weekend, in the weekend newspapers, one MEC in KwaZulu-Natal refusing to drive in a perfectly good car that was being driven by his predecessor. He's gone out to hire a new car. We can say the same for business people in private companies who often declare bankruptcy but pay themselves huge bonuses before they do so, and the rest of the people lose their jobs. How do you get that sector of leadership, whether it's public or private sector, to understand that they too need to take some pain?
Elevating this discussion to Busa, that's precisely where it should be sitting, Karima, because remember, it started as part of the Job Summit commitments that we actually made when we had the Job Summit last year.
But give me companies.
So it's therefore, but Busa, remember, represents all of business.
No,
so
I know that, but which companies have pledged? Let's say Shoprite Checkers is often referred to, where the executives,
we are not at pledging.
What I'm saying is, which companies have demonstrated practically that they're prepared to cap the wages of executives? Because remember, we go to NEDLAC, we ask unions to sign in, lock themselves into wage agreements, often in 3-year cycles. Are executives prepared to do the same?
Karima, you and I are having a different discussion, because as soon as you have it as a Job Summit engagement, then you go and agree it at NEDLAC, and as soon as it is agreed at NEDLAC within all the 4 social partners, therefore you probably want to get it into regulation. So it's not a question whether ShopRite or Nedbank or Discovery wants to do it or not. And I know that you probably are saying, companies are saying that South Africa is overregulated, but for me, when it comes to these things, you have to overregulate, because otherwise you're going to be sitting with anarchy, where people are saying that this can't continue to be, so it's not even at individual company level at the moment. We're actually elevating the discussion above companies, so that it gets to a point where you don't have a choice as a company, but you are actually going to have to observe certain regulation when it comes to the disparities, because therefore, it makes the environment within which you're operating as companies, not conducive because of the social instability.
Busi, I appreciate your passion and your commitment to do that, but commitment and compliance are 2 totally different things. DG, what kind of legislation are you proposing, if any, to make this a reality, so that there is a realization on the part of all the social partners, because there's a lack of trust. People don't trust each other, right? Government is accused of constantly being corrupt. Labour says they must take all the pain. The public sector says, there's no reason for them to invest because it's so expensive. So as a measure, what kind of legislative, if any, mechanism can you introduce to actually get business to comply?
We already have in the employment equity provisions that enable us to look at income differentials. Now, that the department will never ever have enough inspectors to go out and police each and every company. So that's why you expect that companies, as good corporate citizens, they will comply with the law. And one of the issues that Busi spoke about, which is part of the Job Summit agreement, was to do a research study on the models that we can come up with that we could apply across across all sectors, that will enable all of us to be able to monitor the levels at which these salaries are pegged. And that is still under discussion.
Is there a time frame on that as a final question?
There's no time frame on that.
And isn't that perhaps the problem?
It is a problem, but the good thing, Karima, is that with the establishment of the Presidential Working Committee, we're able now to make sure that we push things that probably would have taken a long time are now able to be resolved speedily. So we are in the process now of putting together a mechanism to be able to have a discussion on this, so that that research can then take place.
All right, we've run out of time. This is a discussion, obviously, that we will pick it up again. I'm not sure if there's going to be a 3rd investment conference, but we certainly have to discuss the behavior of each partner in that social compact, so that trust can be built. And, of course, people can put the national interest before sectoral interest. Hilary, Busi, DG, thank you so very much for joining me here on The Fix. Still ahead, the DA leadership race and the Helen Zille factor. Stay with us.